Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're tackling a really core area, assessing and managing ear and hearing problems. We want to cut through the complexity.
Exactly. Our mission here is to give you that clinical shortcut, making this information immediately usable.
We're focusing on the priority concept of sensory perception and using hearing loss as our main example today.
And you really can't understand hearing loss without thinking about the related concepts too, like infection and pain. They often go hand in hand.
Okay, so let's get started. To figure out hearing loss, you first need the basics of the ear's structure, right? The three parts.
Absolutely fundamental. Understanding the external, middle, and inner ear is, well, it's crucial for telling different types of hearing loss apart. That's where diagnosis often starts.
All right, let's unpack that structure. Starting outside the external ear, the pinna, the canal, is there a key clinical link we should know?
There is, and it's fascinating. It goes back to embryonic development. The external ear forms at the same time as the kidneys and urinary tract.
Wow, really?
Yeah. So if you have an adult patient and you notice a significant external ear defect, like an unusual shape replacement, that's a flag. You need to think, could there be an underlying kidney or urinary tract problem? It's a potential clue you don't want to miss.
That's a great clinical pearl. And of course, in the canal, we have cerumen, earwax, important stuff.
Right. It protects and lubricates, guides the sound inwards towards the next section.
Which is the middle ear. What's key in there?
Okay, so the middle ear holds the eardrum, the tympanic membrane. And behind that, those three tiny bones, the ossicles,
Malleus, in Huckus, stapes, smallest bones in the body.
that's them. Their job is purely mechanical. They vibrate and pass the sound energy along. And also, critically, the eustachian tube connects here.
Ah, for pressure equalization, like when you're on a plane.
Exactly. Keeps the pressure balanced on both sides of the eardrum.
And then deeper still, we hit the inner ear. This is where it gets complex, isn't it? Hearing and balance living together.
Very complex. You've got the cochlea, that spiral-shaped organ. Inside that is the organ of Corti with its tiny hair cells.
And those hair cells are the transducers, turning vibration into nerve signals.
Precisely. They convert the mechanical energy into electrical impulses that travel up cranial nerve 8, the auditory nerve, to the brain.
Okay. And right next door.
Right next door are the semicircular canals. Totally separate function. They handle your sense of balance, your equilibrium.
So damage in that tiny inner ear space could easily affect both hearing and balance.
Very often it does. They're intimately connected structurally.
Understanding that structure now makes it easier to grasp the two main types of hearing loss. This is really high-yield stuff. Conductive versus sensorineural.
Let's break it down. Conductive hearing loss first. Think of this as a physical barrier. Sound waves literally can't get through to the inner ear.
So the problem's in the external or middle ear.
Exactly. What kind of things? Well, impacted cerumen is common. Fluid from an ear infection, otitis media, a hole in the eardrum, a perforation, maybe a tumor or something called otosclerosis.
Otosclerosis. That's when the little bones fuse together.
Right, the stapes gets fused and can't vibrate properly. The key thing with conductive loss, though, is it's often correctable. Fix the blockage, fix the hearing.
Okay, but the way these patients present can be tricky. Why do they often speak softly? That seems backward.
It does, doesn't it? It's because their own voice sounds louder inside their head due to the bone conduction, so they naturally lower their volume.
And they hear better in noisy places. How does that work?
Yeah, another paradox. In a noisy room, everyone else starts talking louder to be heard over the background noise. And that louder speech is easier for the person with conductive loss to pick up.
Yeah.
The external sounds are amplified enough to overcome their blockage, essentially.
Fascinating. Okay, let's contrast that completely with sensorineural hearing loss.
Right, the opposite situation. Here, the damage is inside. It's the inner ear, the cochlea's hair cells, or the auditory nerve itself, cranial nerve 8.
What causes this kind of damage?
Lots of things. Prolonged exposure to loud noise is a big one. Certain medications, we call them ototoxic.
We'll definitely need to list those later.
Absolutely. Also, the natural aging process, which we call presbycusis. And diseases like Ménière's disease affect the inner ear, too.
And the prognosis here is different, right? This type is often
Permanent, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Those delicate hair cells, once damaged, don't typically regenerate.
And the assessment cues flip, too.
They do. Tinnitus, that ringing or buzzing sound, is very common with sensorineural loss. Patients tend to speak loudly because they can't hear their own voice well.
And loud environments become difficult.
Extremely difficult. Background noise just muddies everything. It becomes distorted, hard to filter out speech. They hear poorly in noise.
Let's touch on presbycusis, the age-related hearing loss. You said it's sensorineural. Any specific characteristics?
Yes, a key one is that it usually affects high-frequency sounds first and most significantly.
High frequency, like certain consonant sounds.
Exactly. Think of sounds like F's. Shit. Those sharp, high-pitched consonants become harder to distinguish. This makes understanding speech really challenging, even if the volume seems okay.
Which leads directly into how we should communicate. Shouting is out.
You're definitely out. Shouting raises the pitch of your voice, which is precisely the range older adults with presbycusis struggle with most. It just makes it worse.
So what's the right approach?
Speak clearly, speak a little slower, perhaps, and consciously use a slightly deeper vocal tone. Face the person directly, make sure the lighting is good so they can see your lips, and minimize background noise. A quiet environment is key.
Good practical tips. Okay, let's shift gears to assessment. How do we even pick up on hearing loss? What cues should we look for? History is vital, I assume.
Absolutely critical. Ask about any ear trauma, past infections, ear surgeries. Ask about family history. Is there hearing loss in the family?
And medications, you mentioned ototoxicity.
Yes, a meticulous medication history is non-negotiable. You need to specifically ask about drugs known to harm hearing.
Like what? What are the common culprits we should flag?
Well, high doses of NSAIDs can be ototoxic. Aminoglycoside antibiotics, the ones often ending in mycin, like gentamicin. Also some potent diuretics, particularly loop diuretics like furosemide, especially if given IV too quickly.
Good list to keep in mind. What about the physical assessment itself, beyond looking in the ear?
Observation first. Do you see the patient tilting their head frequently? Or leaning in closer when you speak? Those are subtle but important signs.
And when we do use the otoscope, any safety warnings?
Huge one. There's a nursing safety priority action alert about this. You absolutely do not use an otoscope on a patient who is confused or can't hold their head still. You risk injuring the ear canal or eardrum.
Makes sense. Another safety point.
Yes, if you see any drainage coming from the ear canal, purulent, bloody, clear, whatever you need to initiate contact precautions immediately. Assume it's infectious until proven otherwise.
We also need to remember the psychosocial side of this, don't we?
Oh, absolutely. We can't just focus on the mechanics. Hearing loss can be incredibly isolating. It impacts work, social life, family connections, often leading to frustration, withdrawal, and very frequently, depression. It's vital that we encourage patients and their families to talk about these feelings, to acknowledge the impact it's having. It needs to be part of the care plan.
Okay, so we've done our history, our observation. What about diagnostic tests to confirm the type and degree of loss?
The gold standard is audiometry. This is done by an audiologist in a soundproof booth.
And it measures?
It measures hearing thresholds across different frequencies, measured in hertz and intensities, measured in decibels, dB. It pinpoints exactly what pitches and volumes the person can and can't hear.
Just for context, what's normal conversational speech level?
Around 60 decibels, typically.
What other tools might be used?
Tympanometry is another common one. It assesses how well the eardrum moves. It helps to detect things like fluid in the middle ear or stiffness of the ossicles. Basically checks middle ear function.
And imaging. When would you use CT or MRI?
Usually if we suspect something more structural, like a tumor, maybe an acoustic neuroma, or if there's bone involvement or chronic infection causing changes. It looks for soft tissue or bony problems.
All right, let's pivot to management. If it's not surgical, what are the non-surgical approaches?
Depends on the cause, of course. If it's an infection causing conductive loss, then drug therapy is key, usually systemic antibiotics.
And the teaching point there?
Emphasize, emphasize, emphasize. Finish the entire course of antibiotics, even if they feel better. Prevents recurrence, prevents resistance. Crucial.
What if dizziness or vertigo is involved, like in Ménière's?
Then we might use antiemetics for nausea or specific anti-vertiginous drugs like meclizine to help manage the dizziness symptoms.
What about devices to help people hear better?
Yeah, lots of options.
Yeah.
Symbol amplifiers, sometimes called PSAPs, personal sound amplification products, flashing light systems for doorbells or phones, and of course, hearing aids.
Hearing aids, they're basically tiny amplifiers, right? Most helpful for which type of loss?
Generally most effective for conductive hearing loss is that they just make the sound louder to overcome the blockage. They can help some with sensorineural loss too, but it depends on the specific pattern of loss.
And caring for them. What do patients need to know?
Keep them dry is number one. No showering or swimming with them. Clean the ear mold part regularly with mild soap and water, but keep the electronic part dry.
Anything else?
Avoid hairspray or cosmetics getting on them. Check the batteries, often carry spares. They beep usually when the battery is low.
Okay. Now, what if non-surgical options aren't enough, especially for conductive loss? Let's talk surgery. Tympanoplasty.
Right. Tympanoplasty is the umbrella term for surgical reconstruction of the middle ear. It aims to improve conductive hearing.
And that can include?
It might involve just repairing the eardrum, that's a Ménière, or it could involve replacing or repairing the ossicles, that's an aciculoplasty.
What's the vital pre-op teaching?
Patients must avoid anyone with a cold or upper respiratory infection before surgery. Getting sick could force a cancellation or cause complications.
And what should they expect immediately after surgery?
Warn them. Their hearing will likely be worse right after the surgery. This is normal. It's because the ear canal will be packed with gauze or cotton. It takes time for the packing to be removed and healing to occur. Also, teach them to avoid forceful coughing or sneezing if possible. Use open mouth technique if they must.
Post-op care sounds critical for success. Positioning.
Very specific. Keep the patient flat with the operated ear facing up for at least the first 12 hours, sometimes longer depending on the surgeon. This helps the graft stay in place.
And activity restrictions. It's all about pressure, isn't it?
Exactly. For maybe 2 to 3 weeks, they need to avoid anything that increases pressure in the ear.
Like what specifically?
No straining, lifting heavy things, constipation, no drinking through a straw, no air travel. Avoid forceful coughing or sneezing, as we said, and tell them to move their head slowly and avoid bending over sharply to prevent dizziness.
Okay, let's tackle some common specific ear problems. Otitis media, the classic middle ear infection. Pathophysiology.
Simple infectious process. Bacteria or virus gets into the middle ear, causes inflammation, fluid or pus, vexudity, builds up behind the eardrum.
And that causes?
Pressure, which causes pain, often intense in acute cases. It also dampens the eardrum's vibration, causing conductive hearing loss, maybe some tinnitus, like a low hum. On otoscopy, you'd see a red, often bulging eardrum.
Sometimes it bursts.
Yes, if the pressure gets high enough, the eardrum can perforate spontaneously. Interestingly, this often brings sudden pain relief because the pressure is released.
How do we manage it?
Systemic antibiotics are standard for bacterial infections. Low heat application can help with pain. Analgesics too, of course.
What if it doesn't resolve or keeps coming back?
If pain is severe and persistent, or fluid doesn't clear, a procedure called myringotomy might be done.
That's making a small cut in the eardrum.
Exactly, to drain the fluid. Sometimes, especially for chronic fluid issues, a tiny tube called a grommet or PE tube is inserted into that incision to keep the middle ear aerated long term.
Okay, moving outward. External otitis or swimmer's ear.
This is an inflammation or infection of the skin inside the external ear canal, often bacterial, frequently Pseudomonas aeruginosa, especially after swimming.
What are the key symptoms? How is it different from otitis media?
The hallmark is pain, but specifically pain when you move the outer ear, pulling the pinna or pushing on the tragus, that little cartilage flap. Also, a feeling of fullness or blockage in the ear, and maybe some temporary hearing loss due to swelling or debris.
How's it treated?
Usually involves careful cleaning of the canal by a healthcare provider, followed by topical antibiotic drops, often combined with a steroid to reduce inflammation. Warm compresses can help with pain.
And preventative teaching.
Crucially, they need to keep the ear dry during treatment. That means avoiding swimming or water sports for about 7 to 10 days. Also, avoid using earbuds or hearing aids in that ear until it's fully healed.
What about simple blockages, cerumen or foreign bodies?
Yet common issue. If it's just wax, we often use ceruminolytic agents, first things like Debrox or mineral oil to soften the wax. Makes removal easier and safer.
Then maybe irrigation. Any warnings there?
Yes, another key action alert. Never ever irrigate if you know or suspect the eardrum is perforated. You could flush debris into the middle ear.
And one other do not irrigate situation.
If the foreign object is vegetable matter like a bean, a pea, a popcorn kernel, water will make it swell up, making the impaction worse. These usually need manual removal by a professional.
Let's tackle a big one now, Ménière's disease, inner ear problem. Right.
Yes, a really challenging progressive condition. The underlying issue seems to be an excess buildup of endolymphatic fluid within the inner ear labyrinth. Too much fluid pressure.
And it causes that classic trio of symptoms.
It does. Episodic, often severe vertigo, a true spinning sensation. Tinnitus, often described as a roar or loud hum. And fluctuating, one-sided sensorineural hearing loss that tends to worsen over time.
And those sudden drop attacks.
Yes, the Tumarkin otolithic crises. Really scary. The person suddenly falls to the ground without warning, though they don't usually lose consciousness. It's thought to be due to sudden shifts in that inner ear fluid pressure affecting the balance organs.
Management sounds complex. What's the focus?
A lot is on managing triggers and lifestyle. A strict low-sodium diet is often recommended to help reduce fluid retention. Avoiding caffeine, alcohol, maybe MSG. Stress management is important too.
And medications?
Diuretics can be used to try and reduce the fluid volume systemically. Antivertiginous drugs like meclizine during acute attacks. And because of the vertigo and drop attacks, fall precautions are absolutely paramount. Safety is huge.
Is there a surgical option for severe cases?
In really intractable cases, sometimes a labyrinthectomy is considered surgical destruction of the labyrinth. But the major downside is it results in total, permanent hearing loss on that operated side. So it's a last resort.
You also mentioned acoustic neuroma earlier. How does that differ from Ménière's?
Acoustic neuroma is a benign tumor growing on cranial nerve 8. Unlike Ménière's episodic nature, this tends to cause gradual, progressive, one-sided sensorineural hearing loss and often constant, but usually milder dizziness or imbalance rather than violent vertigo attacks.
Diagnosed how?
Usually picked up on an MRI scan. Treatment depends on the size and growth rate. Could be surgical removal, radiation, or sometimes just observation if it's small and not growing.
Okay, so whether it's Ménière's post-op recovery or an acoustic neuroma causing balance issues, home safety is key.
Absolutely. Care coordination often involves a home safety assessment. Look for trip hazards like rugs, poor lighting. Teach patients consistently to move their head slowly. Avoid sudden movements that can trigger dizziness.
This brings us back to communication. We talked about presbycusis, but what are the universal best practices when talking to any patient with hearing impairment?
It boils down to being mindful and clear. Position yourself directly in front of them. Let them see your face and lips. Speak clearly and at a moderate pace. As we said, don't shout. It distorts sound and raises pitch. Ensure the room is well lit.
What if that's not enough?
Use other tools. Write things down if necessary. Use visual aids or diagrams. And critically, if there's a significant language barrier on top of hearing loss or just profound loss, you have an ethical and legal duty to get a qualified medical interpreter involved. Don't rely on family members.
Excellent point. So, wrapping this up, what's the big picture takeaway from this deep dive into ear and hearing issues?
Yeah, I think the essential message is that good ear care starts with really diligent assessment, listening to the history, picking up on those cues, understanding the fundamental difference between conductive and sensorineural loss is key to guiding management.
Right.
And underpinning everything is patient safety, whether that means careful otoscope use, strict post-op instructions after a tympanoplasty, or robust fall precautions for someone with vertigo. Safety first.
Okay, a final provocative thought for our listeners to chew on. We know that tinnitus and hearing loss are huge issues for veterans, often the top service-connected disabilities.
A major public health issue.
So thinking beyond just one-on-one communication strategies, how could we start thinking about optimizing the environment itself as a long-term care approach for these individuals? Things like using sound-absorbing materials in living spaces, designing intentional quiet zones in facilities. Could that be a core part of improving quality of life, moving beyond just coping tactics?
That's a really powerful question to consider. Moving from reactive strategies to proactively designing more acoustically supportive environments. Definitely food for thought.